forget. Before I introduce our guest speaker, we've got a few housekeeping notes. First, there's a reminder that everyone's camera is cut off and muted so that we can cut down on background noise and optimize our connectivity for this webinar. Secondly, we're going to be using the chat. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please enter them into the chat. Remember to select everyone so that everybody can see your question, and we will leave time at the end, even though we'll run a little bit over due to the technical difficulties. And we will be offering closed captioning for this webinar. So let me put in this link here. If you need to use closed captioning, I will be putting in a link to the closed captioning service. Once I enter in that link, you'll just need to go ahead and click on that, and then the box will open for you to be able to activate closed captioning for this webinar if you need to do so. Just want to give you a reminder of the NNLM Code of Conduct and our community agreements that we'll use for this webinar. So we're asking everybody to be welcoming and use inclusive language, be respectful of different viewpoints and experiences, and to show courtesy to others on this webinar. Before we get started, tell you a little bit about who we are. We are NNLM. We have lots of acronyms, as you can see here in our bubble. We are a part of NLM, which is underneath NIH. So NIH is the big company, the parent company, and then NLM is a institute of that, which is the largest biomedical library. And then I am with the network of the National Library of Medicine, which represents 7 regions, offices, and centers located throughout the United States. I'm located in Region 1 in the University of Maryland, Baltimore. You'll see that shortly here on the map. And wherever you're located within the United States or the territories, you should have a NNLM regional office that services you. So here's the map for the lower 48. Didn't show Hawaii, oddly, but you're there. Hawaii is also represented by Region 5 in case we do have anybody from Hawaii on this call. Wherever you're located, you can see that there is a regional office that supports you. So what do? Well, we do 3 things. We offer training in the way of webinars and classes to librarians, health professionals, and the general public. We also offer an access to network of libraries and other organizations. We also do funding for health information outreach and digital equity data services, and even professional development. So in today's webinar, we have 2 objectives that we're going to try to accomplish for today. So we're going to increase library staff awareness and understanding of the role of death and end-of-life doulas who can help patrons for their loss and end of life for a loved one. We also want to demonstrate how library staff can offer a death cafe to help patrons learn about easy and free end-of-life documents, how to find a death doula, how death cafes can help you lessen the fears surrounding by grief and death. So I'd like to introduce our featured speaker for today. It is my pleasure to welcome Carrie Forbes. Carrie is a liaison library at Lapis Library, Health Sciences Library at East Carolina University, where she specializes in working with undergraduate nursing students. She received her MLS from ESU, and in addition to her professional work as a library liaison, she's authored five gluten-free cookbooks. She loves to watch true crime TV shows that her husband consequently can't stand. She's also a cat lover. She likes cooking, writing, volunteering with local hospice as a certified death end-of-life doula, meditation and Reiki practice, and also likes listening to audiobooks and Broadway musicals. So thank you all so much, and please welcome me and please join me in welcoming Carrie today for our webinar. And Carrie, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Faith. And thank you for that great introduction. Let me share my screen here. Okay, are you able to see that?
Confirmed. We have you. Thank you very much.
All right. Great. Let me just adjust here so I can see what I need to see. All right. Thank you again, all of you, for joining me here today. And I am so appreciative that Faith and NNLM were interested in having this webinar. Again, my name is Carrie Forbes. I am a liaison librarian at East Carolina University. Please feel free to ask questions throughout this presentation. Feel free to leave them in the chat. I may not see them during the presentation. However, at the very end, I will answer any questions. And I would also like you to, if you can see the screen, it's got my email address there, forbesc@ecu.edu. Please feel free to just jot that down so that in the event you need to leave early or you'd like to contact me afterwards or have questions, I would love to speak with you. So please feel free to get my contact information there. I also am a certified end of life and death doula, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. And get this, oops, sorry, trying to figure out my, I don't want you to see, there we go. Okay. If you would like to, in the chat, there is this beginning picture here, and it's
Oh,
one of
we
my
can't see the
favorite.
picture anymore. You
Oh, you
stopped
can't. It
sharing.
stopped sharing. Okay, well, that's a problem. Let's see.
Thank you, Denise, for correcting that.
Thank
Appreciate you.
you. Okay, all
Okay,
right.
now we're confirmed we can see your screen again.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, if you would like, in the chat, if you can share one thing that comes to mind when you see this screen, just whatever pops into your mind when you see this screen. And while you're doing that, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I came into the field of death doula work. So I had first become a librarian I actually have worked in libraries for nearly 20 years, and I got my MLS through East Carolina University, and I was able to apply for and I got a position as a liaison for the College of Nursing in 2019, in spring of 2019. So I had not been in librarianship very long before COVID hit. So COVID has kind of defined um, my my career so far as a librarian. And that December 2020, my father very unexpectedly passed away from COVID. And it was incredibly hard. It was probably the hardest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. And I dealt with incredibly intense grief. Um, I was struggling at work. I just couldn't get my head back in the game. And honestly, I think as a nation and all over the world, really, we're going to be dealing with the impacts of this prolonged grief and what we have seen over the last 3 years for a very long time. But one of the things that I remember wishing during that time, because I was the one who was doing all of the things for my dad and trying to get everything organized, trying to do the paperwork, trying to communicate with the funeral home. And of course, it's COVID, so we're not going to the funeral home. We're talking through email or calling and I was also dealing with my mother-in-law who has dementia. And so it was a really, really hard time and a very complex time. And I remember through that time just wishing I could have talked to somebody or somebody who had been through this who could have just kind of led me through. And as I remember looking through uh, I don't know, a Google search, I'm sure one night, I came across the term death doula, and I'd never heard that before. And so that is basically what led me into this work. And I finally decided, I'm really interested in this. And so I took a training. I became certified. I took a proficiency exam with NITA, which we'll talk about a little bit later to sort of helped me feel a little bit more qualified in the work that I was doing. And now I do this on a volunteer basis. I would love eventually, maybe once I retire or further along in my career, to have this maybe as a part-time job or something. But right now, I'm really enjoying doing this as part-time work with hospice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And I just want to go over some of the things that some of you said. Spiritual journey, a man walking through a scary dark forest, entering into a world of light. Oh, I like that. Two hands. Oh, I'm so glad someone noticed that there were these two hands guiding or leading this person into maybe lifting them up. I love all of these perspectives. And that is one thing that I want you to think about as I go through this presentation. You're going to see a lot of different pictures of artwork. And this has been one thing that has really helped me along my grief journey as well. As I love art. I am not an artist. I do believe I'm a very creative person, but I am definitely not an artist. But I love art. I adore art. It speaks to me in ways that other things can't. I'm sure like many of you maybe can relate to music or even for me Broadway. But art really speaks to me too. And in one of the grief courses that I took, I remember specifically that she had us through two of these sessions simply look at a painting, and they were paintings about grief or bereavement, and she wanted us to just spend 10 or 15 minutes thinking about these paintings and then journaling about what we felt. What did we see? What exactly did we feel and think and smell and hear in the time that we spent observing these paintings? And it was a really beautiful thing to do, and it really helped me because I found some art that really spoke to me personally. So you're going to see some of that throughout this presentation. So I'm going to, we might not get to all of this today because our schedule's been a little bit cut short, but I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, but I also want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions at the end. So we're going to briefly cover what a death doula is, the brief history of that role, the current roles of death and end-of-life doulas, what they're doing right now, what are death cafes, and how you can host a Death Cafe library in your program. And throughout this presentation, and at the end, there's going to be a ton of information that you can take home with you. Faith is going to make sure that you have access to the presentation today, to a LibGuide that I created in conjunction to this presentation, and a handout that goes right along with this presentation and covers all of the links that I wasn't able to actually put in the slides. So you're going to get a ton of information thrown at you today, so I do apologize. I'm just really excited about this. Okay, so why do we need death doulas and death cafes? So I thought this was a really funny picture. We have a solid oak casket here that apparently is being sold, and apparently it's only been used once. I don't know what that means, but if you're interested, call Brad. So one of the biggest reasons that we need death doulas is we don't know how to deal with death, especially in the US. Within the top 10 fears of a poll that came out from Chapman University in 2022, and it was a survey of American fears, these were listed within the top 10. Fear of becoming seriously ill was number 2, and granted, this was right in the midst of COVID, so I'm sure that was a big, big fear. And number 4, fear of our loved ones dying. So there's just this huge fear of the people we love dying, so not just us, but our loved ones as well. Another reason that death doulas are so important is most Americans want to die at home. And there was a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll in 2017 that shared that 71% of Americans would prefer to die at home. And over the past 20 years, the amount of people that are using Medicare's hospice benefit has more than doubled. So we have a lot of people who want to die at home, who are using these services, but hospice can't do everything. And that's one of the biggest issues in hospice right now, is that it is critically understaffed, as many places in many areas in our healthcare system are, just because there is just not, there aren't enough volunteers in the world, there aren't enough nurses in the world that can meet all of the needs that we have of people who want to die at home. Our older population is also getting much older, and living far longer. So currently there are over 56 million adults that are over the age of 65. And by 2030, there will be roughly 73 million. And at that point, 1 in 5 people will be at retirement age. So 2030, 1 in 5 people will be at retirement age. So that means you're needing more people who are going to be in not necessarily nursing homes, but in assisted living, in hopefully communities that have some type of social support for older Americans, because more and more adults are choosing not to have children. In the past, we would have uh, been counting on children, on relatives. In the past, you always might have had a grandmother or an aunt, usually a woman, who in the family was kind of like the family's personal death doula. They kind of knew what to expect at the end of life, or they knew how to take care of someone in those end stages of life. And we had those family connections, but families are further apart. Families are mobile, families are getting older, and families have way less children. And honestly, is it really fair to place that burden on children who also are having to live in whatever type of family that they have? If there are, if it's a multi-adult household, most of the adults are having to work. We don't just have a lifestyle economically where only one adult is able to pay for everyone in the home. So there's just a lot of factors here at why we need death doulas and why we need them now. So talking about death doulas, before we let's just talk a little bit about what a death doula is, and then we're going to kind of jump into how they kind of came about to where we are now and how they are termed death doula. So I'm sure most of you, when you hear the term doula, what do you think of? Just put in chat. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear doula? Anybody?
People are saying birth, childbirth, helping with the
Yeah,
birth.
birth, childbirth. Yes, exactly, exactly. Whoops, I see I need to move my chat down. Exactly. You're thinking support, birth. Yes, it's a Greek word. It means woman helper, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a woman. And nowadays it often is not. I mean, one of the leading trainers in the death doula movement is a man who worked as a social worker in hospice. Um, but generally it has been a term that has applied to a woman helping a woman, usually during childbirth. Now, it's also really important to understand that this is generally a non-medical person. This is not a person with a medical background necessarily. Um, they are providing physical, emotional, and spiritual support to someone else during these major life transitions, during birth, during death, and honestly, in the future, I could see this in many other applications, especially in the medical world. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the hospital with a loved one, maybe a parent or an older relative, and you have been stuck waiting during surgery, or you've been waiting after and you don't have anybody really to talk to or to contact. Wouldn't it be amazing if you were assigned like a liaison to help you through that process, so you didn't just feel like you were kind of stuck in the wind until you got a phone call or until somebody came into that waiting room to let you know that your loved one had come through surgery. I really see this being used in many different applications. They also provide holistic support before, during, and after death. And one of my favorite articles that's been written on this so far quoted this as the missing piece of the hospice mission. And what I want to explain to you about hospice very briefly is that there's a really big misconception about what hospice is. When a person chooses to go into hospice care, hospice is really more like a consultant service. They're going to provide palliative care to make sure that for you at home, you're comfortable. They're going to make sure you have the setup you need. Maybe you need a hospital bed. Maybe you need, um, a walker, maybe you need a bedside toilet, a commode, you're going to need pain medications. They want to make sure that your pain is regulated. They want to make sure that you have everything you need as far as setup so that your family members can take care of you or someone you hire can take care of you, but that so you are equipped to go through a death at home. But they're not there 24/7. They are going to be there maybe once or twice a week as a nurse until the very end, or you may have supplemental support. You might have a nurse aide come in for maybe an hour a day. That you'd be really lucky if you got that hour every single day. But you can also ask for hospice volunteers, which is what I often do on the weekends, who can go and provide just general support for the family member. Like maybe she needs to go to church or wants to run and do some errands. That's a great time for a hospice or a death doula to come in and spend that time. But what a death doula can do that a hospice volunteer can't always do is that a death doula has time. And a death doula can meet that need before they've entered into hospice service, when they've entered into hospice service, during the death, and then after that person has died, they can support the family through that process. So you have this one constant throughout that entire process. Whereas with hospice, you're kind of going to get whoever is on call, whatever volunteer is assigned to you that day. And that's not bad. It just means that it's a gap. It's a gap in care. So that's a big thing to know and understand about what hospice does. So looking at, there are many different titles for death doula, and this is one thing that many death doulas are kind of conflicted about. It would be great to have like one title, like a registered nurse, because you know exactly what that means, right? But there is not a regulating body for a death doula, and it's good and bad. It's good because it allows a death doula to not have to prescribe by any certain rules or regulations as far as the amount of time they can spend with a patient or a family. It gives them the ability to charge on a sliding scale basis so that they're not reliant on insurance. They can volunteer up through charging whatever they would like to charge. Um, it also gives them the ability to choose different titles. So you're going to hear death midwife, end of life doula, dying guide, mourning doula, just all different kinds of terminology. But there are some, you're probably going to hear death doula and end of life doula more than you hear the other terms, but they all mean a similar concept, caring for this person at the end of life in a holistic manner. So a brief history of this. So of course I talked a little bit before about earlier, before the 1960s, your grandma was the one who did this, or maybe it was a great aunt, or maybe it was, the cousin who never had kids and who was the one who kind of took care of all of the older relatives um, in that family. You also might have had people in the community. You might have had, elders in a church that might have done this because we were so much smaller, right? Our communities weren't as spread out as they are now. So that role was really not, it was within the family, and it was something that you could rely on friends and neighbors and family members. And we realized in the 60s, once people had mobility and once there were families that were leaving to go elsewhere, that there needed to be a gap, that somebody needed to take care of these people who were dying. So in the 60s, hospice was begun by Dame Cicely Saunders. The concept of a death doula came about from Phyllis Farley in 1998. At the age of 80, she was still a birth doula, but at the age of 80, she realized all of these concepts that are provided during a birthing doula service could also be applied in many ways to the end of life, because it's still a passage, it's still a journey, it's still labor. You're still laboring through this process of the end of life. So she is really credited with sort of beginning this. The first hospice, the first doulas within a hospice program was started in 2003. The first certification program was created by Deanna Flores Cochran in 2005. And now there are many, many, many other programs that are available. Other major contributors to the that are I think are important to know about in the modern end of life care movement is the Association for Death Education and Counseling, which came about in the 70s. And this was really important because people weren't being taught about end of life. We still aren't. We have so far to go in end of life. And I mean, honestly, even though my dad was a person who was a very thoughtful person, and we would have these deep conversations, we never talked about this. And he was sick for the last 7 or so years of his life. So I'm still honestly kind of mad at him that we didn't sit down and have this conversation before the end. But that's okay. I've learned a lot since, and I know that he would be very proud of that. But I do want to point out the work of Ram Dass, Rosha Joan Halifax, and Frank Ostaseki, who I believe are all in the Buddhist faith. And Buddhism has such a beautiful appreciation that that death is as important to life as birth is, and that it's another step in that life cycle. So they have contributed to just beautiful work and understanding. So those are great authors to turn to if you're interested. There was also the establishment of the National Home Funeral Alliance, and finally, the establishment, well, two finallys, the establishment of NEDA in 2017, and this is the National End of Life Doula Alliance, which is the first nonprofit death doula membership and professional organization. And that's really important because they're nonprofit. They're not out trying to make money from classes or teaching. They're trying to establish this professional organization for death doulas so that they can always be learning more, gaining more through continuing education. They can network, and they have some really great things like a professional. I'm losing my words here, but code of ethics. They have a patient bill of rights. They have things that every other medical profession does, even though we aren't specifically in the medical world. Okay, and finally, I do want to point out also that we are also represented nationally by the Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. In 2018, they established an End-of-Life Doula Advisory Council. And so that's really important too, because hospice nationally recognizes the importance of end-of-life and death doulas. Okay, so what does a death doula do? Well, death doulas can offer a variety of services. This is a beautiful graphic here that was actually created by one of the, I think it was Lifespan Doulas. This is one of the training organizations. And I love this, and many other organizations have used this since because it just it covers so many things in this circle of service. They can be a green funeral consultant. They could help you have a funeral at home. They can be someone who can help you speak with and be a liaison for the family, from the family to the nursing home or uh, the funeral home. They can be a respite provider. They can sit vigil with a family during the end of life. They're a conscious dying guide. One of the things that you will see throughout the rest of this presentation is the word active listening and creating a quiet environment, or I mean, maybe the person didn't like a quiet environment, and that's okay too. But one thing I have learned in this is how I am constantly learning how to be a better listener in a space. And that's really hard work to do, especially if you're in it. If you are in the process of someone you love is dying, or you are very sick and you're dealing with all of, you're still trying to figure out all of the things around you, get your life done, get your work done, you don't feel good. You're sick, you're tired, you're stressed, your anxiety is through the roof. And a death doula can come in and they just have this great sense of presence, this calming presence, because they've been here before. They have seen the end. They know the things that your loved one is going to be going through, and they can walk you through that process. Um, Many doulas serve in different aspects. Some doulas want to serve from the beginning to the end, from before you need hospice services till your family is having to bury you, and then you want to walk the family through the grief process. Other doulas, they might just be really good at grief work and they want to work with the family after a loved one has died. You might have a doula who's really good at legacy planning or understanding advanced directives and helping you as a family to understand what papers are really important to have done before your loved one passes away. They are also excellent at making sure that the needs of the patient are being met, that the needs of that dying person and not their family so much sometimes, because sometimes you have bickering siblings or you have family members maybe who don't want your loved one to be cremated. Well, if the loved one is the one that wants that, we really need to honor the needs of the loved one. So that's another great reason to have a death doula. So let's look at just some things that the doula will provide during each of these processes. So this is a graphic, and this is also listed at the end on the LibGuide that I've created for this. There's a great book by Roz Chast called "Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant?" And this was directly from her parents. This is what her parents used to tell her when she would try to bring up the conversation of death and dying with them before they passed away. And it's a wonderful book. This book brought me so much comfort at the end because I dealt with a lot of the same things with my dad. But this is a great book that she discusses just what the process was like for her. So again, before death, we're talking about being an advocate for your loved one, offering active listening. We'll talk about legacy planning. And a really, really important role is that a doula, depending on what training they've had, and their particular specialty, they can be excellent eyes and ears for the hospice team. While you may be there and you might not understand all of the physical components of what's going on with your loved one, a doula can often have eyes on that patient and know, you know what, I see the way that your loved one is sort of gripping the blanket there. I'm kind of wondering if maybe they're in pain, even if they're not saying something. Maybe why don't we reach out to the hospice nurse and just have her come and assess this to make sure that the pain medicines are at the level that they need to be. A doula is really good at seeing those little tiny changes that maybe just an adjustment of the pillows, or maybe if they don't seem to be calming down, and maybe if we put just a really light fan on their face, that'll kind of give them enough of a distraction on the face that they might feel a little better. So they're just things that doulas have the ability to see and do just because of the experience they have in this realm, in this space, that they can really help a family to feel better about their loved one and about how that loved one feels during that time. During an active death, again, we have that component of listening. We're offering this compassionate listening, not only to the loved one who is passing away, but to the family who is there. It's so hard to be there as a family member, and you're going to have families who can't be there. You're going to have people in whatever space, maybe it's just not, they just can't handle it, and that's okay. As a doula, that's what you're there for. You are there to support the family who can be there. You can offer your email or your texting number to the family who isn't there and say, hey, if you just want to talk about this through text later, maybe that's really comfortable for you. You can do that with me too. I am here to listen. I'm here to listen without judgment, because no matter what death experience someone goes through, it's different for every family. We don't have the privilege of knowing the last 40 years of what this family has gone through together. So you don't know the hard things that they've experienced. You may not understand why Uncle Joe 20 years ago had, a problem with, grandpa dying. And it's okay if they want to fix that. It's great if they want to try to fix that there at the end of life, but it's okay if they don't. And it's okay to let all people in that situation know that whatever they're feeling is okay. Whatever you're going through is normal and fine. And both hospice volunteers, death doulas, we can help you get through that. You can also support by, again, we talked about setting that atmosphere, setting that quiet space. It's not a good place for I know that with just in my own experience, I've lost quite a few people in the last 2 years. And when my father-in-law was dying, my mother-in-law was adamant that he couldn't die because he hadn't talked to a pastor, and she thought he was going straight to hell. And she was really upset about this. And I remember her doing this for other deaths as well, and in her day-to-day life, she really wasn't a very spiritual person, but this was very, very important to her. And we had to sit her down and calm her down and be like, you know what? I know that this is really important to you, but right now we can't make this a priority for him. Right now, we just need to support him where he's at. So those are different things that you have to think about, and you have to just try to suspend any judgment on that. There are other things that you can offer. Aromatherapy, if you're trained, you can offer Reiki, comfort touch, spiritual support. Um, there often you can have hospice chaplains of different faiths can come in to support those families. This is not just for Christians. This is for everyone and every experience that we want to be able to offer these services. After a death doula can help with basic care of a loved one's body. One thing that's often misunderstood, and I always like to tell people this because it can be uncomfortable to hear, but if you have the privilege of being with a loved one when they die at home, especially if they're in hospice, and if the hospice nurse is not there at the time, and many times that happens, that you would be there with your loved one without having medical staff there, take the time you need to spend with that family member that your loved one that has passed. We don't know when hearing officially ends. There are so many things that even now that will still be a mystery as to the ending of this physical body. So this is the last time that you're going to have with this loved one in this space, spending the time you need with this body. Now, location dependent. I know that like in Canada, you actually can't wash or work with a body um, without having a funeral license. So that is something to consider, but I'm pretty sure everywhere in the US this would be allowed. But it's also just the time to continue this space, continue this calming presence. Um, Make sure that your family members have all had the opportunity who want to spend time with this person before you've called your hospice nurse and other staff members to let them know to pronounce that death. The doula can also be the coordinator between the funeral home and the family. They can offer community resources once the death has taken place, once the funeral has happened. They can really be there to offer that community support and help find community support for that family afterwards, and just really help with day-to-day emotional support and all of those things that come after a death. Okay, we are running short on time, so I am just going to quickly run through this. Um, how to find a death doula. There are actually many good ways to be able to locate a doula. I've listed out some major websites here that are really good places, excuse me, good places to find death doulas that have death doula directories. So you have NEDA that I talked about earlier, the National End of Life Doula Alliance. This is a great place to go. They also show the doulas that have taken the NEDA proficiency exam and passed, which show that those doulas have a great understanding. They've taken a test that showed that they understood the professional scope of practice, a doula model of care, a code of ethics, and that they have read through and understood anti-racism and inclusivity statements. So all of those things, if they're important to you, I really do recommend using NEDA. ANELDA is also a training organization, but they also have a professional directory. Doula Givers is a training organization and that has a directory. The Death Doula Collective is a nonprofit that has a great directory as well. This is just a very brief list of some of the training programs that are available in the U.S. There's Doula Givers, there's Care Doula School, there's even the University of Vermont has an end-of-life doula certificate now, and I think that we're going to see that more and more from other universities in the future. So what is a death cafe? This is completely separate from death doulas, but it's often run by a death doula, or you'll often find them that are run by death doulas. So in a death cafe, this is basically This can happen anywhere from your local coffee shop to a library, to churches, to social organizations, maybe a senior center. This could happen anywhere. And it's just a group of people who are usually strangers who get together over a hot beverage and a dessert, and they have the opportunity to just informally talk about death. It's not so much a grief support group. It's not so much a time to have like a special speaker. It's really just a time to open the floor, create this safe space that people are allowed to talk about death without it being weird. And it probably still will feel weird to the people who attend, but I've attended several of these and I've hosted several of these. And I can tell you, this has been such a great thing for me because it gives people the opportunity to think about things and talk about death in a way that they never have before. These were begun in 2004 by a Swiss sociologist named Bernard Crittaz, and he called them Café Mortals, which sounds way cooler than Death Cafe to me. But the idea was picked up sort of more professionally by John Underwood, who was a British man who quit his job to bring cafes to London in 2011. And unrelated, he actually passed away from cancer, from leukemia, in 2017 at the age of 44. And he stated in a newspaper article that this work, starting the Death Cafe movement, was some of the most meaningful work of his life. And by 2019, over 6,000 of these Death Cafe events had happened. And now in 2023, over 10,000 of these events have happened. So where to find these cafes? Locally, you'll probably need to be the one to start one because they are still very new in the US, but these are a couple of places that you can search. The Death Cafe website itself has a listing of all of the current events. You can also search Eventbrite and Facebook using the term Death Cafe. And a lot of death doulas and hospice websites have opportunities of sharing these events as well. If you were to host this in your library, and these are just a few slides because being the librarian, we have to look at the research, right? And one of my favorite pieces of research was just one of these. I think it's actually on the middle slide here. Oh, no, maybe it's on the very end slide. Um, was from a study by Nelson and Wright and colleagues, and they had prepped and implemented and evaluated a death cafe at a nursing school at an academic health center, and I believe this was in 2020. This is 2018. And they found that they observed that by being able to provide a space for debriefing and personal reflection, they were able to help the students and professionals in their school. They realized that by providing that safe space of no judgment where they weren't graded, they weren't expected to know something, but they could just share an experience, that almost every student felt like they had they just had a really great time with that, and it gave them the ability to better share and talk about end of life and death and dying with their patients and with their fellow colleagues. So just a couple of places. Now, we don't have a lot of time here. I know we're at the end, but I do want to say I've got really super easy instructions complete with a PDF at the end to show you how to host one of these cafes. It is as easy as just having a space either virtually or in your library and basically asking people to come. They usually do this over coffee and dessert just because I feel like we commune better with each other and we're more comfortable when we have coffee and dessert, or when we're sharing over food. So that's the whole point of that. It's always free. It's always a safe space. Again, it's not bereavement. It's not for guest speakers. It's really a space for people to share. And that is a basic agenda if you're ever interested. And I do want you to know that all of these slides will be available. There is also this corresponding LibGuide here that is listed here, tinyurl.com/supporting EOL. And it has everything that I have talked about here today in much more detail. And I know we don't have a ton of time for questions, but if there are any questions today, I would love to answer them. And thank you all so much for being here today. What questions can I answer? I really want at least one or two questions. Who's got a question for me? Is there any controversy? That's a great question. So there is some controversy. I think probably the biggest controversy is that um, probably with the fact that the role of a death doula can kind of bleed over into other roles in hospice or in practice because it's so similar to the role of a hospice volunteer. But I would say by and large, they're highly respected and they are welcome members, especially um, for hospices that are well aware of the practice and how they benefit their patients. Let's see.
The other questions, I'll moderate read for
Sure.
you, Carrie. The next one that we got is, okay, the controversies. Are there death doulas for different ages of life? So I'm assuming that you mean like for children versus
Right.
adults. Let me know if that's what you mean in the chat, please.
My guess is, do you mean, or that you mean for when they're passing away at different stages of life? Generally, a death doula is going to work for anyone at any age. Now, you may have death doulas that may not be as comfortable working with children, just because that's such a scary situation, but you can always ask and kind of learn more about your doula. You're going to want to, and I actually have this addressed on the LibGuide as well. There, I have some tips for how you might want to evaluate a doula before you choose one um, to help you better understand if that doula is going to be a best fit for you. But yes, doulas can absolutely work with families of children who may have end of life or life limiting illnesses, cancer, that type of thing. Yeah.
Great. The next question we got is there a common conflict that appears between doulas and medical professions? And just so you guys know, I am going to try to capture as many of these as possible. And if we run out of time, then I will try to send them to Carrie. I'm sure she wouldn't mind answering them offline. So,
I'd love to. I don't know of major conflict that has happened or that I'm aware of. I think I think like in any practice, people are probably going to be very protective of their people, right? So if you have a hospice staff that has worked a lot with a family, they might be a little protective over their family and they might not, especially if they're not familiar with death doulas, they might not really understand the role that a doula can play in that family. Um, so that's why it's really important, especially if you are going into hospice, to say, hey, I want you to know that we're also working with a death doula. We'd like to introduce you. And normally they have this great symbiotic working relationship because death doulas can provide such great information to the hospice team. And actually, many doulas are also trained as hospice volunteers. And it is important to know that any hospice volunteer in the US has gone through rigorous training. They have to get the exact same training as every other employee in that hospice office. So I went through about 20 hours of different training to go through to be confirmed as a hospice volunteer. You also go through a background check, you go through a drug screening. So it's also really good to look for doulas that have actually had some hospice experience and experience working with hospice teams because they have incredible training on top of their doula training.
great. There was a question about how where someone would get training, but I think one of your resources will actually point to that.
Yes,
Um,
I have got a whole section on the LibGuide that talks about the different schools that are available. Technically, you don't have to be trained to be a death doula. I highly recommend it because going into a space of someone dying is not an easy place to be if you don't know what to expect. So I do highly recommend people to get training. And I also have a great list of questions for you to evaluate training programs to see what programs might best fit for you, from looking at cost to looking at, do they require clinical hours? There are all different kinds of criteria that you can look at to see if they're a good training program. And there are many, and most of them are online.
I'm going to try to wrap these two questions into one because I think they're related to kind of what you talked about.
Okay.
Um, there was one here that was asking about, let's see, about interviewing someone who is a good fit, as well as how would you be able to sense whether that death doula would be right for them or not. So I'm going to kind of put those together in the sense, how would you know if they work for you? And then how would you assess if somebody would be a good fit?
So, I think you would want to look for someone. I mean, do you feel comfortable with them when you're talking to them? Any death doula should be willing to offer like a free 30-minute time to sit down with you, explain what they do, explain, if they do charge, explain their cost structure. You would make sure to sign a contract with them. It should be a very professionally led session. And if they're volunteering, that would be made very clear as well. So you're always going to want to judge, that interaction with them. You can also ask for references. You can ask, normally they're going to have a website, or if they're like me, they're in the process of building a website that has some references of people who have worked with them in the past. Um, they are often going to have a Facebook page. It's a great place to ask people questions about the business there. See if they have a social media presence. See how transparent they are in their practice. Those are all really good ways to kind of, have a better understanding of what that person brings to the table.
Great. And I'm going to try to do two more questions so we can wrap at 3:05.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone asked, had you had any pushback from your organization offering death cafes at libraries?
Well, I will say, um, yes, I have. And I think this is going to be a really great program, probably more for public libraries, just because they're used to doing types of programs like that. I actually have been in the process of trying to do one with my library, and we're still sort of working out the logistics, and I may need to do it in a way that I'm not actually on my job as a librarian, so I'm doing it sort of, off hours, so that I can offer this. But there has been some pushback, but I believe if we can get the opportunity to make that breakthrough, I think this would be an incredible learning experience, not just for the library on staff, but for all of the people in this, especially if you're on a medical campus, because medical professionals deal with death every single day, and they are hardly ever taught about it in the classroom. They hardly ever cover anything about death and dying when they're actually in their programs. They hit that on the floor. And what a weird thing to have to just learn on the job. Um, so I think there's a huge benefit to having this possibility in libraries. So reach out to me if you would like to, because I'd love to talk to you about some ways that we can try to make this happen.
Great. And just so you all know, I did put the link down for the evaluation in the chat. We would love to have you do that, especially if you're looking for CE. That's how you get the CE code. For the questions that we did not get to, I've actually put them in a Word document and I will send them to Carrie. So that way, if there's, additional if she doesn't mind to take the time and would answer those, then I'll try to send them out with the link that we have for the recording. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties we have, but thank you so much for coming. Many thanks to you, Carrie, for doing this, and I can see this again being in the future because there was so much interest. It could be broken up in so many ways,
Yeah.
and thank you so much for making yourself
Oh,
available to come
absolutely.
and talk about this topic and just give us some more insight to it as we try to kind of normalize these conversations moving
Yes.
forward in this
Yes.
process.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming today. And yes, please, please, please reach out to me. Librarians, we love getting emails from people who want information. So
Yes,
please
and
email
just
me.
just as a reminder for those that are still on the call, you will receive email with the recording link, and it'll have the presentation and the handouts that Carrie gave. And then you'll be able to listen to it if you logged on later, if you know someone who missed it and didn't get the updated link. So again, thank you all so much for this, and hope to see